Chapter 13. It was a mid-range restaurant, serving neither gourmet nor fast food. It catered to a middle-class clientele. A singer/pianist played popular American music badly, while tuxedoed waiters and gowned barmaids moved freely among the too many tables. Edel shook his head as he walked in the door. The place was not to his taste. He'd prefer a quiet supper club or a nice, quiet coffee shop. This place was too cloying, trying too hard to be sweet and lovable for its diners from the nearby American Air Base. But then Edel hadn't selected it. It had all started hours ago, sitting at his desk, waiting for the phone to ring. They had all been there. Kilgore, Cap, Patricia, even Tabbert had put in an appearance. They sat silently, everything having been said in the marathon meetings throughout the day. The plans had been laid, arrangements checked, equipment brought over, then portioned out, personnel positioned. Now there was only the waiting. 5:15, 5:20, 5:25, 5:30, nothing. 5:31, 5:32, 5:33. Long minutes, seeming like hours. Then a knock on the door, causing everyone to jump. "What is it?" Edel almost yelled. The shocked orderly took a step back. "Hey, sorry, but there's this guy on the payphone in the lobby saying he's got to talk to you." The young man was almost trampled as the occupants of the small office raced for the door. Out of security headquarters, through a side door of the main building into the large ornate lobby. Edel spotted the payphone with the receiver lying on top of it, and a nurse starting to hang it up. "Halt!" Edel had yelled. The frightened nurse dropped the receiver as she was pushed roughly aside by Edel. Tabbert took her aside, whispering quickly as Edel held the phone to his ear. "Conrad, Edel." "Did you think to tap the payphones, Conrad?" Newman's voice sounded amused. "No." He stood out of the way as Kilgore took down the number, then raced to another phone. "Well," Newman said consolingly, "that's going to make your life a little more complicated, isn't it?" "I'm getting used to it." "Are you?" Newman chuckled. "My apologies for that as well." "I received your letter." "And?" Newman sounded expectant. Kilgore came up to him, stretching his hands apart, mouthing the words, "Need time." "I would like to talk about it." "I'm sure you would, but unfortunately, I don't have the time." Kilgore's eyes were begging for more time. Patricia was writing something on a pad. "I need to know," Edel said after delaying as long as he dared, "that you will guarantee my safety." "Will you guarantee mine?" "Are you suddenly afraid of me?" This time Newman paused. "There's nothing sudden about it." Patricia held up her pad to the sweating security chief. Edel nodded, then read from it. "I do not really think we have anything to talk about." "Really?" Edel paraphrased the next note from Patricia. "Perhaps it would be better for both of us if we ended our relationship here and now." A brief silence. "Very good," Newman said. "Tell Dr. Nelwyn that the patient refuses to be challenged into prolonged discussion, and give me your answer. I'm hanging up in 30 seconds. Edel looked quickly around the group. Seeing no other options, he turned back to the phone. "I agree to meet with you." "I thought you might." Newman sounded satisfied. The phone box at the northeast corner of Jalisborg and Klemstrasse in 30 minutes. The line went dead. So it had gone throughout the night. Edel would drive from phone box to phone box, each time being given terse instruction to the next call, and a set time to get there. But that was over 5 hours ago. Now he was in this annoying restaurant, having just received his instructions from a phone box outside. He walked up to the maitre d'. "Yes, sir," the formally dressed man said as Edel approached. "May I assist you in some way?" "Conrad Edel." The man beamed, the result of a 150-mark tip received earlier that morning. "Ah, yes, sir. Your companion is expecting you. Would you please come this way?" He led Edel through the main dining room to a curtain booth in the back. "May I take your coat, sir?" Edel shook his head as he stared at the closed curtain. "Very well, sir. Enjoy your meal." The man hurried away. Edel took a deep breath, tried to calm his racing heart, then stepped through the curtain. The table was set with an assortment of foods ranging from sandwiches to elaborate dinners. A strange man sat at its head, quietly staring at Edel. "Who are you?" Edel demanded. Ghislaine wiped his hand with a silken napkin, stood up, then held out his hand to the security chief. "That's not really necessary, is it? I represent the man you seek." Edel didn't move as he looked around the isolated booth. "What is this?" Ghislaine withdrew his hand. "Sir," he said in a tense voice, "you have your instructions, and I have mine. We are neither of us going anywhere for the moment, not if we wish to avoid catastrophe." "Where is he?" Edel asked in a steely tone. Ghislaine shook his head. "Please, if you would sit down, I'm sure you would be more comfortable. You're going to be here an hour or so." They stood there, tensely staring at each other for nearly a minute. Then, slowly, reluctantly, Edel sat down, joined by his host. Ghislaine smiled a strained smile. "I recommend the beef and oyster sauce personally." When Edel didn't move, Ghislaine shook his head. "If you leave before I instruct you, your meeting will never take place." He paused. "That would be bad for you, but immeasurably worse for me, I am quite sure. For both our sakes, I urge you to comply with your instructions." Edel seemed to relax a little bit. "I'm sure it has been a long evening for you," Ghislaine said. "Have something to eat, please. It has all been paid for." For the next hour, Edel sat there silently. He picked at a salad, sipped from a beer, but he never took his eyes off Ghislaine. Finally, Edel heard the buzz of a cellular phone. "Yes?" Ghislaine handed it across to Edel. "Hello. Enjoy the meal? How long is this charade to go on?" "You sound tired. Maybe we ought to forget the whole thing." Edel remained silent. "Okay," Newman said. "Next stop. You will remove all of your clothes, including underwear, shoes, and socks. Also, all jewelry, watches, whatever. My associate will provide you with suitable attire and footwear." Edel saw Ghislaine lift a small duffel onto the table and begin unloading the clothes within. "Your belongings will be returned to you by the afternoon post tomorrow. You have my word," Newman said in a somehow changed voice. "When you've changed," Newman continued, "leave through the back of the restaurant, turn right, down the alley. That'll take you to Brent's Dress. Turn left and you'll be contacted at the first phone box." The line went dead. 10 minutes later, in workman's coveralls, work boots, and a wool cap, Edel approached the phone box. 10 seconds later, it rang. "Yes?" "Turn around, please," Ghislaine's voice said. Then he hung up. Confused, unsure of what was happening, Edel slowly turned around. "Hello, Conrad," Newman said as he stepped out of a nearby doorway. "Care to take a walk?" He gestured down the street to Edel's right. 10 feet in front of me, if you please." They started off together, Newman trailing Edel by about 3 meters. "Were all these theatrics really necessary?" Edel asked, without looking back. "Please hold all questions till the end of the tour," was the amused response. They walked for 20 minutes. At Newman's direction, they turned down alleys, crossed dark, badly lit streets, doubled back on themselves several times. They moved into a Turkish neighborhood. The smells of Turkish coffee, hashish, and marijuana mixed in the still night air. These, combined with the boarded-up buildings, told Edel exactly where they were. Finally, they stopped in front of a small grocery. Newman tossed him a set of keys, and Edel unlocked the door. Newman locked it again as soon as they were inside. For a few minutes, he stared through a tiny tear in the newspapers covering the windows before he put on the lights. As the bare, almost empty store lit up, Newman smiled, spreading his arms, gesturing at the walls. "Welcome," he said happily, "to chez l'ennemi." "Are you my enemy?" Newman shrugged. "I must be somebody's. I mean, look at all the fuss you people have gone to." Edel looked around the deserted store, noticing for the first time the sheet-covered wall behind him. He turned back to Newman. "What is this place?" "A simple thing, but mine own." "So we are to play word games, huh?" Edel managed a rough smile. "I apologize in advance for my lack of vocabulary." Newman gestured at a pair of folding chairs nearby. They both walked over and sat down. "No games," he said quietly, "just some straight talk." "That would be refreshing. So, how are you, Conrad?" Newman seemed distracted. "Tired. And you?" Newman nodded. "The same." He picked up a marker cap from the floor and started playing with it. "I've been thinking about our talks." "Yes?" "They were very important to me, had a great deal of influence on my thoughts this last month or so." Edel nodded sadly. "I could tell that by the way you left the last time we saw each other." Newman looked up and smiled. "You resent my escape?" He seemed genuinely interested in the answer. "No," Edel said firmly. "I am certain you felt you were justified." "Thank you," Newman said with mock graveness. "What I resent," the security chief continued, "no. What I regret is that you lied to me. I had thought that we had reached a place together where that was no longer necessary." Newman looked shocked. "When did I lie to you?" "You promised not to try and escape." "I never made any such promise." A hurt expression quickly passed across his face. "I never lie about the important things." Edel shook his head. "You have a convenient memory, my friend. You tell me when I promised not to escape, and I'll go back with you right now, peacefully, no trouble." "Very well." He paused. "It was immediately after that silly affair with Dr. Mont. Do you remember?" "The man was an ass," Newman spat out. "We talked about the review board. You didn't think they would see you after the incident." "I remember that," Newman said, genuinely trying to remember the moment. "I assured you that the meeting would take place." He paused. "That is when you made the promise." Newman thought for a long moment. Then, oddly, he smiled. "I was getting worried," he said easily. "I thought I was in trouble just now." "What do you mean?" Edel said with real interest. "I did make you a promise," Newman said, leaning close to Edel, "but not how you remember it." "Indeed?" "If you will remember, I promised not to make any trouble during the transfer to the review board." He smiled at Edel. "I didn't say anything about the meeting itself." Edel thought it over for a moment. "My apologies," he finally said, while he sneaked a glance at his watch. "You are quite right." That seemed to please Newman. "So maybe we can start over. What do you say?" 10 more minutes, Edel thought. Delay, agree, pause, wait. Edel smiled and nodded. Perhaps. Newman gestured at Edel's clothes. I apologize for the clothes, but I had to take precautions. I understand. He looked around, noticing 2 Bibles on a nearby table. You've continued to study? Newman walked over to them. King James and Revised Standard. I'm also looking for one in the original Greek and Hebrew. For one brief moment, Edel forgot why he was there and what was going to happen in just 8 more minutes. Any passages in particular? Newman nodded and handed one of the Bibles to Edel. Edel opened it to one of the marked pages and read the underlined passage. And when they had brought them forth, they said, Flee for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Flee to the hills, lest you be consumed. Newman nodded solemnly. Sound advice. Edel looked up from the Bible. But you haven't taken it. No. Why not? Newman took the Bible and opened it to another marker. Grim-faced, he handed it back to Edel. As the security man read silently, Newman recited the passage from memory. I did not sit in the company of merrymakers, nor did I rejoice. I sat alone because thy hand was upon me, for thou hadst filled me with indignation. Edel looked up as Newman continued, a pained expression in his eyes, his fists clenching and unclenching. Why is my pain unceasing, my wound incurable, refusing to be healed? Wilt thou be to me like a deceitful brook, like waters that fail? Edel stood up, then walked over to the younger man. When he spoke, his voice was soft, caring, pastoral. Forgotten for that one moment was who the man in front of him was, what he had done, as well as what he could do, and that less than 3 minutes remained. You blame God for your troubles? Newman turned away from him. Edel persisted. You once said to me that you took responsibility for your actions, as a soldier must do. He paused. God is your salvation, not your tormentor. With his back to Edel, Newman smiled, but when he spoke, his voice seemed filled with pain. Which do you believe, that I'm a freak of nature or an evolutionary harbinger? Edel put his hand on Newman's shoulder. I believe that you are a troubled child of God. He paused. I believe that you have been shabbily used and abandoned. I believe that you are confused and need help. I believe that you will not begin to heal until you take the Lord into your heart. Newman turned around. I never said that I blame God, he said coldly. No? No. On the contrary, I thank him for those gifts. Edel looked completely confused. I don't understand what gifts. The man was completely off balance. Newman walked deeper into the storefront. My isolation, indignation, my pain, my wounds, even my eternal abandonment have been blessings, not curses. What are you saying? Newman smiled, walked over to the sheet on the wall, looked at Edel, then ripped the sheet down. Edel turned, looked, then froze. Jesus Christ, was all he could think to say. Newman raised his eyebrows. Not quite. And there was 1 minute left. Outside the grocery, the search team was almost fully deployed. Following the miniature tracking beacon that Edel had swallowed before leaving the institute, they'd stayed several miles behind him until his movements had stopped. In the restaurant, an advanced scout had moved up and established with a covert listening device that Edel wasn't meeting with Newman. They had waited it out, 2 scouts following Ghislaine, when he'd left 5 minutes after Edel. But when the trackers had noted a series of sharp turns and backtracking by Edel, Kilgore had known that he must now be with Newman. They had begun to move in as soon as movement had stopped. Edel had been fully in agreement with the plan of attack. They would wait 15 minutes after he finally met with their target. Then they would come in hard and fast. As a former counter-terrorist himself, Edel understood the necessities of what would be an overwhelming assault. SSV, it was called in the commando community. Surprise, speed, violence. All of it would be required to secure this target. Kilgore checked his watch. 1 minute to go. Big Dog 5 from Big Dog 1, report. Big Dog 5, we are secured in the establishment north of the target. Charges are in place on the common wall, and we are ready to break through on command. Big Dog 9 from Big Dog 1, report. Big Dog 9, we are secured in the bakery to the south of the target. Charges secured to the common wall. We're go. Big Dog 7 from Big Dog 1, report. Big Dog 7, it's a solid brick wall back here. No windows or obvious egress points, but we'll stand by. High Dog 1 and 2 from Big Dog 1, report. High Dog 2, 4-1. We are in position and have clear downward 30-degree angles on all front windows and doors. Light silhouettes on the paper, not identifiable. Big Dog 1, copy. Kilgore checked his watch. It was time, but still he hesitated. He turned to the small crowd that was standing by his command van. This is going to be our best opportunity. If you have any alternatives, now's the time. One by one, they shook their heads. Patricia, Kepf, Tabbert, none of them said a word, but their fears were written on their faces. Ruanoff, standing well back at Kilgore's request, slowly shook his head, then melted off into the shadows. Kilgore nodded, then picked up the microphone. High Dog 1 from Big Dog 1, give me one flight right each in the north and south front windows on my command. High Dog 1, copy. One flight right, north and south. Patricia leaned over to Cap. What's a flight right? He never took his eyes off the door to the grocery. An explosive tear gas projectile. Big Dog 5, Big Dog 9 from Big Dog 1. Go with entry and flashbangs on 3 count after flight rights. Big Dog 5, copy. Big Dog 9, copy. As she was leaning over to ask, Cap mumbled her answer. Concussion grenades that give out a momentarily blinding light. Kilgore checked his watch. I can't risk any more time. High Dog 1 from Big Dog 1. High Dog 2, 4-1. Wait 10, then green light to fire. High Dog 2, 4-1, copy. 10 seconds later, the small, unassuming grocery became a fire-breathing dragon. 8 or 9 booming roars echoed through the street as blinding flashes of orange and blue light leapt up inside the store. Smoke poured through the shattered windows and combined with falling glass from nearby buildings to make a surreal, hellish scene on the street. Instantly, the heavily armed and gas-masked search teams moved in. Smashing through the door and remnants of the windows, they poured into the tiny store like ants on an animal carcass. Kilgore was with the second wave. 10 minutes later, a soot-stained Kilgore walked slowly back to the psychiatrist, who had moved to the street in front of the blasted store. Nothing. What? Tabbert's voice rose 2 octaves. Kilgore shook his head. Nothing. The place is empty. He took a deep slug of oxygen from his mask, then continued as his eyes teared up, mostly from the gas. They were there, but there's a freaking big hole near the back of the place. He paused for more oxygen. The son of a bitch dug right through the freaking foundation into an old sewer line. Looks like it dates from the war. I got men down there now, but it's a goddamn maze. How soon before you catch up to him? Tabbert asked hopefully. Kilgore fixed him with an angry look. Last time took 35 days. As the psychiatrists fell into an urgent conversation among themselves, Kilgore took more oxygen, then wiped his eyes with a damp handkerchief. There's one more thing, guys. They instantly looked up at him. There's something in there you need to see. 1 kilometer away, deep in Wittelsbach Park, a sewer grate creaked and moaned under the constant pressure of 4 hands. Finally, it gave way with a noisy crack. A pair of eyes cautiously appeared through the open grate. Almost indiscernibly, they made a 360-degree inspection of the green park, then, like some subterranean creature, ducked back down. A minute later, Edel, followed quickly by Newman, climbed out. "Hey," Newman was saying as he straightened, "you didn't have to come." Edel was bleeding slightly from the nose. "I wasn't given any choice." The young former commando smiled at the old former commando. "All I did was throw you in. If I hadn't, you'd be looking at a state funeral about now." He looked around. Time to go. He took a few steps, then turned back to the beaten-up security chief. "Don't follow me, okay? I don't want to save your life, then end it in the same hour." Edel looked up at his comrade. "Don't run. Let me bring you in. I promise you will not be harmed." Newman stopped, then turned around. "You mean like that little display back there? No, thank you." Edel walked over to him. "Listen to me, Brian." A shot rang out. Newman threw himself to the ground and rolled to his side. In almost the same movement, he pulled the Tokarev TT-33 pistol that he'd had Ghislaine get for him. Quickly, he fired 4 rounds at the spot he'd seen the muzzle flash. When no fire was returned, he rolled to a kneeling position, then fired 4 more rounds into the dark. He dropped the clip and threw in another. As he did, a figure jumped up from behind a rock and raced off. Newman fired 5 rounds at the running form, then slowly stood up. "I know him," he said softly as he stared at the spot the man had run from. Then he turned back to Edel. "How the hell do you figure out where to—" He stopped. Edel was crouched on all 4s near the spot he'd been standing. His head was down and he was breathing heavily. Newman walked over to him and knelt down. "Where?" he asked softly. "A not good place," Edel wheezed out. Newman took a deep breath. "Shit." They had brought up large fans to ventilate the small storefront, but even now, after 20 minutes had passed, the smell of the CS gas still permeated the place. The 3 doctors held bandanas over their faces as they picked their way around the debris of the forced entry. Evidence-gathering specialists were carefully picking through the wreckage, sifting through every used styrofoam cup, paper bag, or piece of clothing for any clue that might set them back on Newman's trail. Technicians were busily setting up sodium vapor lights to brighten the dark span near the back, where the explosives and projectiles had knocked out the lights. The 3 entry teams stood by gaping holes in the north and south walls, with their debriefers, carefully replaying their actions, assessing successes and failures for use the next time. But the same thought went through everyone's mind. Will there be a next time? Kilgore led the doctors through the shattered scene toward the back of the store. "It's here, on the back wall." Patricia looked around as they walked. "Can we get copies of everything you find, Captain? It might help in figuring out his next move." "I'll see to it," Kilgore said as he stopped short. "Here it is." He shined his flashlight along the wall. The psychiatrist peered through the gloom, trying to make it out. It's some kind of mural, Patricia said, as she slowly appreciated its size. Tabbert nodded. Ink, I believe. Kilgore pointed the flashlight on the floor. 8 or 9 marker pens of different colors lay against the wall. We found about 50 of them scattered all over the place, he said. Cap walked within inches of the drawing. Captain, Cap said as he squinted to make out the detail, can we possibly get more light? Kilgore turned to a corporal who was walking by. How long, Tony? Another few seconds, boss. 30 seconds later, the sodium vapor light sizzled to life, then threw the entire area into a painfully bright resolution. Remarkable, Patricia said in an excited voice. Extraordinary, Tabbert said in a hushed voice. Cap moved back a few feet to take in the entire mural at once. He stood there for a full minute, not saying a word, his only expression an unnoticed tear, working its way down his grim face. Is it possible it predates Newman's occupancy? Patricia asked. Cap shook his head. Look at the faces. The mural was set in a field. A light purple sky with orange clouds serenely looked down on a green field. The background was dotted with hills covered in green bushes, and a series of what appeared to be dirt paths crisscrossed each other. The paths seemed heavily trodden, lying deeper than the grass on the hills. In the middle of this pastoral scene were 6 people, 5 men and a woman. They were running, naked, toward the hills. Their faces were twisted in agony, their naked bodies bleeding from angry welts all over their exposed skin. And they bore an eerie but not exact resemblance to Alexander Beck, Manfred Tabbert, Jack Clemente, Otto Kapf, Conrad E. Dell, and Patricia Nelwyn. They seemed to be running through piles of tortured, dismembered, decomposing bodies, almost knee-deep, and behind them, flying midway between the ground and the sky, was a swarm of things. They were insect-like, about half the size of the running figures. Their translucent wings seemed to beat heavily in the air as they pursued the runners through the field. Their bodies seemed to be covered by machined steel, contoured plates, 7 or 8 of them held in place by metal bolts. They had long, jointed, upwardly curving tails with painfully sharp red stingers at the end. Blood dripped from some. A dismembered human arm hung off another. A still-beating heart was impaled on yet another. The insect things' heads, disproportionately large for their bodies, had long, apparently silky blonde hair, topped by golden, 5-pointed crowns. Their faces, some in profile, some partially hidden, others facing the spectators, were human, and all too familiar to the people in the storefront. From the face of each of the insect things, Brian Newman looked out at them, or down at the bodies and the running figures. His eyes were yellow-orange, his teeth exaggerated in length and sharpness, his expression purely feral, but it was Newman. Off in the farthest corner of the mural, next to what appeared to be the mouth of a volcano, the point from which the insect things appeared to be swarming, stood another figure. The 3 doctors, after standing in mute shock for 10 minutes as they tried to take in the enormity of the mural, crowded around that corner of the picture. They examined it with the magnifying glass that Kilgore found on the floor, each in turn studying what turned out to be the silhouette of a man. Behind him, gaps in the smoke from the volcano appeared to form a series of numbers over his head. 2, 27, 9, 1, 11. This needs to be carefully preserved, Patricia whispered. I agree, Tabbert said. in the contagious hushed tone. Cap stepped away from the mural, biting his lower lip, shaking his head, seeming to be deeply conflicted. He wandered through the debris, ignoring the mural, which the others couldn't take their eyes off. Finally, he stopped, kneeled down, then dusted off the book he'd pulled from under a chunk of wall. He sat down and began flipping through it. The resentment directed at who he perceives as his tormentors. Tabbert said clinically, "I understand, but what I find interesting is his subconscious manifestation of himself as a form of insect life, perhaps subconsciously viewing himself in the light of a latent inferiority complex. Mosquito-swatting man, so to speak?" Patricia shook her head. "More like a metamorphosis. Caterpillar to pupa to chrysalis to evolved form." She pointed as she talked. Newman's attempt to explain his evolutionary progression, from weak, defenseless Homo sapiens to Homo crudellus, cold-hearted, relentless man forged in the bowels of the volcano, emerging to challenge the weaker evolutionary form for dominance on the planet. Before Tabbert could interrupt, Cap's voice cut through, causing them both to turn to him. "And the fifth angel blew his trumpet," Cap read in a strong voice, "and I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key of the shaft of the bottomless pit. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft." Patricia and Tabbert turned back to the mural, looking from the smoking eruption to the purplish sky. Cap continued. "Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth, and they were given power like the scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any green growth or any tree, but only those of mankind who have not the seal of God upon their foreheads." Cap stood up, then walked over to the mural. "It begins to become clear," he said softly. "The strange inscription on the envelope, the statements that others need adjust to him rather than the opposite, the initials after his signature." He paused. "This drawing." He continued reading aloud. "In appearance, the locusts were like horses arrayed for battle. On their heads were what looked like crowns of gold. Their faces were like human faces, their hair like women's hair, and their teeth like lions' teeth. They had scales like iron breastplates. They have tails like scorpions and stings." He closed the book, finishing from memory. "They have as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he is called Apollyon." Tabbert was trembling as he looked from Cap to the mural, but Patricia just looked confused. "Spell it out for me," she said hesitantly. Cap laughed cynically. "It is all too apparent." He paused. "Brian Newman has gone quite insane." "What?" Kilgore, who had been speaking on his cell phone for the last few minutes, came up and joined the conversation. "We've got the man who met with Edel. He's a pornhouse operator from the east side." He looked at the frozen expressions on Patricia's and Cap's faces. "Did I miss something?" Cap turned to him. "Please go on, Captain." Nervously, Kilgore continued. "Well, the man's cooperating. He's given us Newman's alias, and the local cops think we'll get a lot more from him." "Which is it, Captain? The last name, is it Abaddon or Apollyon?" Kilgore was stunned. "Apollyon," he said quietly. "How did you—" "So he is now Charon Apollyon." Cap seemed to be in deep contemplation. Kilgore looked down at the slip of paper in his hand. "How in the hell did you know that?" As Cat answered the soldier, he kept his gaze locked on Patricia. "I was raised in a more rigid world than this," he said slowly. "My upbringing consisted of school and church, and as with most of my countrymen, the chief of staff included," he said as he looked over at the trembling Tabbert. "The tale depicted in Mr. Newman's rather frightening representation is well known to me. It was used on a great many occasions, I'm afraid, to, as you Americans say, put the fear of God into me. I recognized it almost instantly, as I suspect Chief Udall must have." He paused. "Has he been located yet?" "No." Kilgore was studying the mural. Cap sighed. "No." He paused. "The numbers appearing above the darkened figure merely confirm my impression. They are from the archaic Lutheran steganograph." He handed the Bible to Kilgore. 2 indicates the Second or New Testament, 27 the Book of Revelation, 9 the 9th chapter, 1 the first verse is the starting point, 11 the 11th verse is the end. Kilgore looked it up, read the passage, then looked back at the mural. "Damn close," he said, "but the first name he's using?" "To all my friends on shore," he smiled. "Do not forget the inscription on the envelope. Charon is the Greek figure of mythology who ferried the souls of the damned across the river Styx. When you confirmed that he had chosen the Greek form of the angel of the bottomless pit, the rest was clear." He walked over to the mural. "Remember that he signed his note to Chief Udall with the letter C.A. after his name? Charon Apollyon, all perfectly clear." "Not to me," Patricia said angrily. "Not at all." She took several steps away before whirling back to face Cap. "And who says that he's gone insane?" Cap shook his head and stepped away from the mural. He nodded at the gruesome depictions. "Newman," was his sad-voiced answer. At the edge of Whittlesbach Park, in a bus kiosk lit by a single bulb, Newman helped Udall lie down on the broad stone bench. Newman pulled off his shirt, balled it up, and placed it tenderly beneath the older man's head. Udall groaned as a spasm of pain shook his body. "It is, I think," he said in a weak voice, "over with me." Newman nodded. "I think you lost part of a major abdominal vessel. Massive internal bleeding, probably severe damage to several organs." Udall's face took on an amused look. "After all these years," he coughed up some blood. Newman wiped the dying man's face. "After all these years, to be shot down by my own." He smiled weakly. "It is a supreme irony." Newman looked down at him. "I don't know if it will make you feel any better, but it wasn't one of ours." "No?" Newman shook his head. "It was a Russian." His eyes went cold, violence pouring off him like an odor. "A Russian colonel named Runoff." That seemed in some odd way to please Udall. "There is symmetry in that," the former cold warrior said softly. He looked up into Newman's eyes. "You will kill this Russian colonel?" "Without a doubt." Newman's voice was gunmetal cold. Udall nodded, causing another paroxysm of pain to roll through his body. "It is not Christian of me," he said in a pained voice, "but somehow that makes me feel—" He struggled for the word. "Clean. Do you understand?" "I do." Newman brushed the man's hair out of his eyes. "Is there anything I can do for you? Any arrangements you want made?" His voice was soft, but not comforting. Udall shook his head. "I am alone except for my church." He paused. "But I would like to be buried in the churchyard, by the juniper, I think." "I'll make sure they know," he said. "And if they don't, I'll move you there myself. You have my word." Edel smiled as he coughed up more blood. This is one of the important things, yes? Yes. The security chief seemed satisfied. There is just one other thing. Name it. They have all said a great many things about you. He tried to smile, but the spasms were too much now. The talkers, the doubters, the doctors. And I have seen the picture, your picture. He paused to let some of the pain pass. I would like to know, please. Newman smiled, then bent down and whispered in the dying man's ear. Slowly, a forced smile spread over the man's face. Newman straightened up. Ah, Edel said, that is as it should be. He looked up at Newman with a deep longing in his eyes. I do not believe in allowing men to suffer needlessly. Do you? Newman shook his head, came to attention, and snapped a salute. Edel straightened himself, closed his eyes, then began reciting. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Newman's right hand flashed out, smashing Edel across the bridge of his nose, sending bone fragments flying into his brain. He quivered for a moment, then lay quiet. On earth as it is in heaven, Newman finished as he turned and walked off into the night. She had been going for over 30 hours without a break. Despite the late night cold, she'd sweated through her blouse and jacket hours ago. Her temples were throbbing from sleep deprivation, hunger, confusion, and anger. Patricia threw her purse on her bed as she stripped off her clothes. Whatever the theories, disagreements, or worries, her priorities right now were a shower, a meal, then a couple of hours sleep. The rest she would take up later. She grabbed her robe and walked into the bathroom. As she walked through the door, a powerful hand reached out, grabbing her by the throat. She was actually picked up by that iron grip and brutally shoved against the wall of the bathroom. She could barely breathe, barely think, as Newman put his face inches from hers. His eyes were wide open and unblinking, nostrils flared, taking deep, even breaths. His expression was beyond fury. Later, she would remember thinking that if death had a face, this must surely be it. I have a message for you and your associates, Newman whispered in a guttural voice. I'm making you responsible for delivering it. Nod for yes, die for no. She felt his breath on her face as she nodded. Conrad Edel is dead. By my hand, but not by my wish. He is to be buried in the yard of his church by the juniper. I am making you responsible for it. Nod for yes, die for no. She nodded quickly. I'm leaving soon. Any attempt to stop me will cause the greatest possible disaster you can conceive of. He paused. There are reactors in places other than Abkhaz. You and your associates will not interfere with my leaving the country. I'm making you responsible for it. Nod for yes, die for no. Again, a quick, terrified nod. He pulled her off the wall and dragged her back into the bedroom. He threw her onto the bed. She frantically tried to crawl across it to reach the gun she kept on the night table. He effortlessly grabbed her by the leg, dragging her back to him. 2 minutes later, she was tied firmly and securely. Despite the overwhelming terror that was welling up inside her, clinical Patty felt something else. An exhilaration at this unclinical, raw, exposed contact with the demon/hero of her papers and dreams. As Newman reached across her to grab a scarf from the far night table, his face passed within inches of hers, his right hand accidentally sliding across her bare breast. She shivered in anticipation, then, almost as an afterthought, gasped out, "No, please don't." Newman looked at her with an odd expression. Then he chuckled, looked around, picked up the robe, and tossed it on top of her. "You never have quite got it, have you?" he said in an amused voice. Instantly the amusement was replaced by the death mask. The last thing he said as he bent low over her prone form, "After it's all over, after I've left the country, and you all start to forget what really happened, when all you'll be thinking about are your precious theories and unanswered questions." He paused and put his mouth against her trembling ear. "Don't come after me, ever," he whispered. "Leave me alone. Anyone comes looking for me, I'm making you responsible." He gagged her, got off the bed, then walked over to the telephone. Calmly, he dialed a number, waiting for it to be answered. "Hi," he said in an upbeat tone. "Can I speak with John Kilgore, room 1296? Thanks loads." He turned to Patricia, loosening the ropes on her ankles as he waited. He suddenly turned back to the phone. "Captain Kilgore." "Who is this?" "Karan Apollyon." A long silence on the line. "Yes." "I'm sorry we never got to meet personally," Newman said casually. "I think we might have been friends." "We still can be," Kilgore said cautiously. "Why don't we meet somewhere and talk about it?" "Okay." "What? Okay. Where would you like to—" Newman raised his eyebrows as he smiled at Patricia. "I meant Patricia Nowens. Why don't we get together here?" He paused. "You have 40 minutes, he said as he hung up. He smiled at Patricia, who looked terrified. "Relax, Doc, I'm leaving, but someone's got to untie you." He turned and started out of the room. Suddenly he stopped, seemed to be thinking something over, then came back. He looked down at her, then pulled the robe off, tossing it back into the bathroom. Newman smiled down at her exposed naked body, nodding in approval. "When a bunch of guys come busting in here in 20 minutes or so, it should be for a humbling scene." He headed for the door. "You could use the humility."